I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 136 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Health. In accordance with our routine motion, I am informing the committee that all remote participants have completed the required connection tests in advance of the meeting. Pursuant to an order of reference of May 29th, 2024, the committee will resume its study of Bill C-368, an act to amend the Food and Drugs Act, Natural Health Products. I would like to welcome our panel of witnesses. We have representing the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, Jasmine Gannett, Vice President, National Affairs, and Michelle Auger, Senior Policy Analyst, National Affairs. Representing the Canadian Health Food Association, Aaron Skelton, President and CEO, appearing virtually, and Jules Gorham, Director with the Regulatory Affairs and Policy. On behalf of the Direct Sellers Association of Canada, Peter Maddox, President, and on behalf of the Food, Health and Consumer Products of Canada, Jerry Harrington, Senior Vice President, Consumer Health, and Robert Kremczynski, Vice President, Health Policy and Regulatory Affairs. Thank you all for being with us here today. We're going to begin with opening statements of 5 minutes per organization, starting with the Canadian Federation of Independent Business. And I understand Jasmine Gannett is going to speak for CFIB. So welcome to the committee. You have the floor.
Good afternoon. My name is Jasmine Gannett. I'm the Vice President of National Affairs with the CFIB. I'm here today with my colleague Michelle Auger. We would like to thank the committee for inviting us today. I'll make my presentation in English, but we are available to answer questions in French as well. The CFIB represents 97,000 SMEs across every industry and region of Canada. Based on our monthly survey called the Business Barometer, the level of optimism of small business owners is currently very low. Every single line of a small business budget is increasing and demand is low. Our members would like to see government reducing the tax and regulatory burden to help them with the rising cost of doing business and give them more chance to grow their business and improve productivity. I'd like to mention that we are not experts in natural health products and therefore cannot answer technical questions related to the specific of these products. However, we represent nearly 2,000 small businesses across Canada that will be impacted with the recent change by Health Canada regarding natural health product. I'm turning it to my colleague Michelle now.
So over the past few years, we've seen a piecemeal approach to NHP policies. Instead of a coherent, forward-looking strategy, Canada has been introducing new rules bit by bit, whether it's Vanessa's Law, increasing licensing requirement, increasing fees, and additional labeling rules. This isolated approach leaves many small businesses scrambling to comply, often without a clear understanding of the long-term vision of the sector. This creates confusion and inconsistency. Furthermore, our members believe that Health Canada's current approach overlooks a crucial fact. NHPs are not pharmaceuticals and should not be regulated as such. For instance, the recent introduction of cost recovery fees being later layered on top of stricter labeling requirements does not consider the unique realities of small businesses operating within the sector. One of our members, who imports approximately 800 different types of NHP, has projected that the cost recovery program could add an extra $500,000 per year to his business expenses. SMEs operate with tight budgets, and many may find it challenging to absorb these rising costs, especially all the additional costs associated with compliance. This forces many SMEs to make some tough business decisions, like reducing investment in their operation, reducing in their employees, reducing innovation, reducing into proper health and safety measures. Such situation also creates an uneven playing field between small and large businesses. With large companies better equipped to absorb these expenses, this ultimately hinders the ability and the competitiveness of SMEs. Bill C-368 seeks to repeal sections of Budget Bill C-47. However, it is important to note that Budget Bill C-69 also included further measures impacting NHP businesses. Our members are not against the modernization of NHP regulation. However, they're concerned about Health Canada's introduction of multiple uncoordinated regulatory changes, which risk overwhelming small businesses, complicating their survival in an already very tough economic landscape. As such, CFIB supports the passing of Bill 368. It's a very important bill to a lot of our members operating within NHP sector. Thank you for attention to these concerns, and we look forward to answering your questions.
Very much. Next, we're going to hear from the Canadian Health Food Association. Mr. Skelton. Oh, okay. Ms. Gorham.
Thank you very much. Merci, Monsieur le Président et membres du
Thank you, Chair and members of the committee, for having me today. My name is Jules Gorham. I'm the Director of Regulatory Affairs and Policy at the Canadian Health Food Association, a trade association representing natural, organic, and wellness products in Canada. Aaron Skelton, our CEO, and I are grateful to have the opportunity to speak before you today. The core issue we bring to you today is the continued abuse of Health Canada's authority. In 2023 and 2024, Health Canada introduced significant amendments to the laws governing natural health products through budget omnibus bills rather than following the parliamentary process. This has undone the hard work of prior legislative reviews conducted by previous parliaments and this committee.
Through Division 27, Part 4 of Bill C-47, Health Canada redefined NHPs within the Food and Drug Act. This redefinition is not just semantics. The passing of that bill fundamentally changed how NHPs are regulated, placing them closer to the likes of pharmaceuticals than the lower-risk products they inherently are. Adding a change of this magnitude to an omnibus bill was a reaction to the Auditor General's report that would bypass stakeholder consultation and questioning by this very committee, who had already stated that Vanessa's Law was too complex for NHPs back in 2014. But catching an entire industry off guard and evading proper parliamentary process has left us with a mess that has severe ramifications for business, trade, and public health. It is upon this committee to remind the department that Canada has laws that compel our public service to respect international trade law and fair, transparent public engagement. In less than 3 years, the NHP industry has been subject to 6 major legislative and regulatory changes in the form of 2 omnibus bills, new labeling laws built off of those used to manage prescription medication, a cost recovery program proposed without proper cost-benefit or gender-based analysis, and a new inspection and good manufacturing practices guidance similar to that of pharmaceuticals. The impact of such layered, unchecked powers is not hypothetical. It has already created a staggering and untenable situation for companies across the sector. It fosters an imbalance that makes being compliant an unattractive and risky business. The Food and Drug Act and the NHP regulations exist to give industry trust in the regulators and stability in our system. If they can be changed without scrutiny or transparency, what protection exists for the industry or for Canadians? We would like to be clear that CHFA does not represent any smoking cessation or tobacco products. The argument that NHPs must remain defined as therapeutic drugs to keep nicotine pouches behind the pharmacist's counter is worthy of a debate of its own. We would also like to clarify a commonly cited falsehood that CHFA and our members are against regulations. Since 2004, NHPs in Canada have been the most strictly regulated in the world under a very rigorous framework. However, Health Canada's approach is increasingly focused on creating an overly complex and costly pre-market system, requiring extensive resources, but without offering corresponding post-market monitoring, which Vanessa's Law will not solve. This burdensome, imbalanced framework still fails to deliver the consumer protection it promises. Misinformation about the safety of NHPs has been a common thread through multiple testimonies by Health Canada. These serious adverse reactions that Health Canada repeatedly uses to justify the need for more regulations are taken out of context and promote fear-mongering to the Canadian public. NHPs have a long history of safe use. Our access to information requests and 2 independent studies have concluded that the 700-plus cases cited by Health Canada and the Minister occurred in patients who were also on other treatments. It is impossible to establish a causal relationship. I also want to take a moment to let this committee know that the lipstick that I am wearing today cannot be recalled. It is a cosmetic product, which are not subject to Vanessa's Law, despite them being part of the original self-care framework. As an industry, we continue to support regulation and legislation that protects Canadians and is developed in a transparent and responsible and appropriate manner. Aujourd'hui, nous demandons à ce comité.
Today, we ask this committee to support Bill C-368 and demand that Health Canada uphold the transparency all industries and Canadians expect from government. We cannot understate the need to properly approach legislative and regulatory changes of this magnitude. We will be pleased to answer your questions.
Merci, Madame Gorham.
Thank you.
Mr. Maddox, welcome to the committee. You have the floor.
Thank you to the Chair and Committee for providing me with the opportunity to speak today. My name is Peter Maddox, and I'm the President of the Direct Sellers Association of Canada. DSA Canada was founded in 1954, and we have over 60 direct selling and supplier member companies, including well-known brands such as Mary Kay, Arbonne, Avon, USANA, Shackley, Soul Life, and Immunotech. We represent a diverse and dynamic industry that is integral to Canadian entrepreneurship, and we care deeply about customer service and consumer safety. Every year, the direct selling sales channel accounts for an estimated $3.4 billion in retail sales and contributes $1.5 billion in personal revenue to the approximately 1 million Canadians who participate as independent sales consultants, 84% of whom are women. Many DSA Canada member companies include NHPs in their product portfolios, and around 45% of current independent sales consultants gain at least some income from selling NHPs. Our focus today is to raise concerns about process, specifically the process that was followed as Bill C-47 brought Vanessa's Law to the NHP space, but more broadly how this is symptomatic of the imperfect process that industry has seen in federal regulation of NHPs, which has led to a lack of transparency, clarity, and certainty for all stakeholders. This is creating unnecessary economic barriers and risks for both consumers and businesses. Vanessa's Law, including mandatory recalls and label changes, was introduced to NHPs via an omnibus budget bill without being open to significant levels of debate or consultation. We question the value of adding these measures when existing tools such as stop sales and inspections are infrequently utilised. Effective regulation must be backed by consistent and proactive enforcement. Otherwise, existing rules or the introduction of new regulation has nominal impact. With the introduction of Vanessa's Law, along with other proposed Health Canada initiatives, such as cost recovery, we have been disappointed by the lack of consultation and of economic impact assessments, including studies of the impact on women. Our desire is for a world-class NHP system built on best practice, cooperation between all stakeholders, use of research and data, and an intention to balance the needs of consumers, industry, and other impacted parties. Slipping a new requirement into existence via an omnibus budget bill is one piece of evidence that this is not happening. The uncertainty and lack of clarity in regulatory processes is causing Canadian direct selling companies to struggle with product innovation and is pushing our multinational businesses to consider reducing their product offerings or exiting the Canadian market. Furthermore, international NHP direct selling companies, not yet operating in Canada, are choosing to expand into other markets instead. The result is diminished investment, employment, and tax contributions. Uniquely in the direct selling industry, it also reduces earning opportunities for the many Canadians who participate in our channel as a side hustle or gig for supplementary income. A lack of consistency, timeliness, and predictability, both in decision-making, program implementation, and ongoing operations, is hurting the economy, reducing consumer choice, and raising costs. One area where collective action could help to improve the situation for Canadian entrepreneurs and consumers is an enforcement focus on those international businesses who undertake commercial activity under the auspices of Canada's personal use exemption. If we do not invest in policing these unregulated products entering Canada, more companies will see the personal use exemption as a way to distribute products to end consumers without having to do the right thing and go through the Canadian regulatory process. Unapproved products create potential health risks for consumers, but also punish those companies who are deeply committed to the Canadian market and are operating here in good faith and good practice. In closing, DSA Canada supports Bill C-368 as a means to reset and realign the NHP regulatory environment, enabling all stakeholders to work together to create a system that prioritises consumer safety while fostering economic growth. Thank you, and I welcome your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Maddox. And finally, the Food, Health and Consumer Products of Canada, Mr. Harrington or Ms. Kremczynski? Mr. Harrington, yes. You have the floor. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The members of Food, Health and Consumer Products of Canada produce most of the natural health products sold in Canada, and the vast majority of over-the-counter medicines also used by Canadians in the practice of self-care. Self-care empowers Canadians to play a greater role in the management of their own health, and in so doing, frees up resources in our healthcare system to deal with more complex health issues. Bill C-368 is about a vital Canadian industry, but it's also about a very important part of healthcare at a crucial time for our struggling healthcare system. FHCP members greatly appreciate this committee's interest in Health Canada's NHP program, and we agree with virtually all stakeholders that that program right now is struggling. Along with the concerns raised by the Auditor General that the committee's already heard about, NHP product authorization and site licensing operations are both severely backlogged, at times threatening product launches and even expansion into foreign markets. The committee has heard a lot about these issues, along with industry's significant concerns about the labeling regulations and cost recovery. These are the problems that are blocking access to NHPs and keeping our members up at night. But Bill C-368 addresses none of those problems. It's impossible to frame our response to 368 without reference to Health Canada's self-care framework. The framework emerged from the original debates around Vanessa's Law in 2014. The concern at the time was that it would anchor over-the-counter medicines to the prescription drug framework while leaving natural health products in a separate legislative framework, despite the fact that both categories sit side by side on store shelves and are both used by Canadians without the supervision of a health practitioner. The government of the day responded to those concerns with the Consumer Health Product Framework, which sought to create a risk-based regulatory system for both product categories separate from the prescription drug regulations. Since then, the framework has been a source of both promise and of frustration. After rebranding in 2016 as the Self-Care Framework and a series of cross-Canada consultations in 2017, the framework was reorganized into a three-phase project in 2018. First, it proposed new labeling rules for NHPs modeled on previously passed rules for OTC products. Second, it proposed crucial regulatory modernization for OTC medicines to simplify market authorization pathways and provide innovation incentives. Finally, the third phase of the framework would bring NHPs into this modernized framework, including the simpler product application pathways and innovation incentives. It would implement cost recovery and apply Vanessa's Law. FHCP was alarmed by that proposed plan because we knew that the OTC rules had been a disaster for industry and for consumers. Nonetheless, the technical discussions on regulatory modernization promised meaningful new efficiencies and innovation incentives, and industry worked hard with the department to move that crucial piece forward. Then the pandemic hit, and progress in the framework came to a halt. In 2022, those labeling regulations were approved and implementation timelines were set. Less than a year later, the NHP cost recovery proposal was put forward, and Bill C-47 brought NHPs in under Vanessa's Law. The promised regulatory reforms, originally targeted for 2019, were characterized as to be determined sometime in 2025 or beyond. At that point, the idea that the self-care framework was about separating self-care products from prescription drugs was hard to defend. All measures undertaken to that point had simply moved NHPs closer to the prescription drug framework. Discussions around broader regulatory modernization had virtually disappeared. Now, one of the great ironies of this whole process is that the problems identified in the 2021 Auditor General report are all things that the framework would have addressed had it been completed in the original timeframes. Simplified product approval pathways originally proposed under the framework would have improved consumer access and been much more efficient for industry. They would have also freed Health Canada resources from pre-market approvals, which the AG found robust, and allow them to be applied to post-market enforcement, which the AG identified as lacking. That, in turn, would have permitted the development of a realistic cost recovery proposal that would generate sustainable funding for Health Canada without punitive costs to industry. And that brings us to today's debate. FHCP and its members appreciate this committee's genuine interest in the sector. However, passing Bill C-368 would not be without risks for industry and wouldn't solve the real immediate challenges our sector faces. What both consumers and industry need is the modern consumer health product framework that was promised in 2014. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Ms. Gromczynski and I are looking forward to your questions.
Thank you. We're now going to begin with rounds of questions, starting with the Conservatives for 6 minutes. Mr. Doherty, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To our guests, thank you for being here. I appreciate your testimony. I will start with Ms. Gorham. On Tuesday, Minister Holland, in his line of or his opening intervention and his question or his answers to the questions, as well as his officials, stated that over 4,500 consultations, a robust consultation process took place. I asked the officials repeatedly, twice, if your association, Canadian Health Food Association, was consulted. Both times they said yes. Is that true?
We were not consulted on Bill C-47.
C-47, okay. To the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, were you consulted on C-47?
If my memory is correct, we appear at the Senate committee on that bill.
Mr. Maddox, were you consulted on C-47?
No.
Mr. Kremchins, or Mr. Harrington, were you consulted? Was your association consulted on C-47?
My recollection, it was involvement in the process when the bill was proposed, but I don't recall any Health Canada consultations. Mind you, that's a couple of years ago.
Is it your testimony today that that Canada already has a robust system in terms of stop sale for issues such as what the minister said? And I would have to say this. I would like to characterize his testimony as sensationalizing issues that can be found in many different areas. Repeatedly talked about rat feces and urine and foreign objects. As we sit today, is there policy in place, legislation in place, that can enforce a stop sale on a product if that is found? Ms. Gorham.
Yes, Health Canada and the minister have stop sale powers on NHPs.
Okay. So I guess the question that I would ask then to all of our witnesses is if C-47 is so damaging, Vanessa's law is so damaging to our Canadian health food industry, why do you feel that there was so little genuine consultation and that Health Canada then proceeded without allowing the industry with meaningful input? Why?
Me?
Yes, sure.
Sure, I'll take this. Thank you. Thank you, Chair, for the question. I should be going through the Chair. I don't know. I think we struggled. We spoke, Aaron and I and our team spoke about it after Tuesday. I think several times the department said that this is a very compliant industry, that they have very few problems and there is a very compliant and very cooperative was said several times. So we failed to understand where there was no room to follow proper legislative processes, proper parliamentary processes, and why Vanessa's law had to be done through an omnibus budget bill, you know, in the dark of the night and take everybody by surprise.
Well, and I might take it even a step further. We saw earlier this year when Health Canada officials characterized this as life and death. They used the death of the 18-month-old child in Alberta as a significant reason, as a catalyst to go moving forward with this, which I then called them on it. I knew I was very familiar with the issue and then called them on it repeatedly that this was untrue, yet they refused to capitulate and reverse their decision, apologize for it. I think what we've seen, or I guess I'll leave that for a question or for a comment from anyone on the committee as to why you feel that Health Canada and perhaps the minister has felt the need to vilify an industry that provides so much to so many. Mr. Harrington, would you?
I can't speak to the minister's thinking. I can say that this industry has an excellent reputation internationally. Since the introduction of the natural health product regulations, one of the first things we saw was over the course of the next decade, exports of those products from Canada more than doubled. That's a sign of confidence.
Anybody else? Go ahead, Ms. Auger.
Pardon me. So from our members' perspective, even when these clause and provisions were included in the bills, there was very little information and detail as to what that entailed. And so our members that are impacted by these changes were totally caught off guard because they didn't really know the repercussion. And that's the same thing that just occurred with Bill C-69. There's some impacts there with impacting natural health products. And so when we actually reached out to Health Canada and said, hey, what does this mean for small businesses? We've got nothing from them.
One last question, because I know my time is short. Just to be clear, this impacts Canadian businesses only. Canadians will still be able to receive online, over-the-counter, direct-to-consumer through Amazon and other, like foreign countries. Foreign products are not being met with the same regulations. Go ahead.
So in our consultation, we do highlight that, and it kind of creates an unfair playing field for businesses who are even trying to compete in Canada, operating in Canada. People are just going to go to Amazon and just import them and go under the radar.
And businesses go down.
Exactly. And that's all included in the consultation we've already submitted. Businesses are already feeling that with the competition of Amazon in other sectors.
Thank you, Ms. Auger. Next, Mr. Nakthy, please, for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair. And it's interesting that Mr. Doherty started on the question of consultation, and upon his request in the last meeting, Health Canada has submitted to this committee an extensive document that demonstrates meetings and conversations and consultations that have taken place on natural health products alone, going as far back as 2016. So let me ask some of our friends, maybe I'll start with Ms. Gorham, with you. Have you been meeting with Health Canada, or your organization, I mean, on issues dealing with natural health products over the last few years?
It is within Health Canada's mandate to consult with stakeholders.
And consulted over the last few years.
Regular consultations do happen. Consultation on Bill C-47 did not happen.
Okay. Mr. Harrington?
Consultations with Health Canada are a weekly occurrence with our organization.
So consultations do happen, and you've been meeting with them over the period of time. And in those consultations, there has been conversations around possible application of Vanessa's law. Ms. Gorham? Yeah.
If I just go back to Tuesday and quote the minister, he said since 2014, there's been 4,500 consultations. That would equal almost 1.5 consultations a day. There has not been 1.5 consultations a day.
Sorry, I've got limited time. My question was, in your in conversations with Health Canada and consultations, have they discussed application of Vanessa's law to natural health products?
As far as I'm aware, the last conversations would have been to what Mr. Harrington spoke to, the self-care framework. That would have been in 2019. That was not on Bill C-47.
And Mr. Harrington?
We did have outreach from some senior officials at Health Canada about potentially including NHPs in Vanessa's law on a couple of occasions, but there would, those were bilateral conversations. And we expressed at the time our concern. The way I would have.
So the conversations have taken place. And Ms. Gorham, just looking at BIA, since BIA was tabled, preceding that, there were at least 4 meetings with CHFA on Vanessa's law with Health Canada, according to the documents that have been submitted?
When Bill C-47 reached the Senate, our president and CEO, Aaron Skelton, asked if he could testify because we were not consulted, and Aaron testified at Senate that we did not have meetings with the department. No.
You did not have at least 4 meetings with the department passed after tabling of BIA?
We had a meeting with the DG at the time. She's no longer there. She told us that she did not know that it would be in the budget, Mr. Natvi. We weren't consulted on Bill C-47.
So I am hearing that there's been consultations that has taken place, and there's been conversations, ongoing conversations around Vanessa's law, and it's I find it not parliamentary at all for Mr. Doherty to suggest that the minister and the nonpartisan senior officials of Health Canada were lying his words in one of his social media posts. But I'm mindful of my time, and I want to move forward. And Ms. Gorham, I've got some really important questions that I want to ask you. Do you think the government should be able to mandate a recall, yes or no?
I think if the government has gaps, that they should go through proper consultation to fix those gaps.
The question is, should government
If
have the
recall-
power to a mandate to recall a product, yes or no?
If there is a gap and recall is the gap, then they should go through proper stakeholder consultation to fill that gap, yes.
Okay. Do you think the government should be able to use an injunction to stop the actions of a non-compliant company if there is an immediate risk to human health, yes or no?
I think that the government might have gaps in its powers, and they should consult on those.
I'm not talking about gaps in powers. I'm talking about. And so you don't think the government should have the power to recall a product?
That's not what I said.
So you do
not what
think
I
there
said.
should be a power, okay. Do you believe that government should be able to recall lettuce contaminated with E. coli or milk contaminated with listeria?
The government can recall milk and lettuce.
So it should have that power?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you believe that the government should be able to recall a health product that's contaminated with E. coli? Yes or no? I'm asking the witness the question. Thank you for your intervention.
Mr.
Yeah.
Point of orders. Chair, I'm finding the intervention by my colleagues from the Conservative Party and trying to feed answers to the witnesses a disservice to this committee.
Yeah, I agree. Mr. Nakvi has the floor. He remained perfectly silent when Mr. Doherty posed his questions. I would ask that you extend the same courtesy to him. Go ahead.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Chair,
Yes,
may I
Mr.
answer
Skelton.
on behalf of CHFA? I thank you for the question. I think it's important to look at what is being discussed, what product we're discussing, and then apply appropriate powers to that. So wide sweeping powers for recall? No. But depending on the risk profile and the risk history of those products, then depending on the situation, then yes, a recall might be appropriate. I would remind this committee that when it was discussed at this committee back in 2014, it was deemed unnecessary. And I would respect that decision. And if that decision needs to be revisited, it should be revisited in a more thorough manner.
But Mr. Skelton, you would agree with me that if we have government has powers to recall a head of lettuce or another vegetable consumable product because it has E. coli or some other bacteria because it may jeopardize human risk, that same power should at least extend to something like a national health product.
A brief answer, please.
No, I think the risk profile was determined for those products, and at that point, recall was appropriate. It was reviewed for NHPs, and it was deemed not appropriate.
Thank you, Mr. Nakvi. Monsieur Thériault, pour 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. When I look at national health products, there are a few things that lead me to believe that there have been issues from the last 10 years that are coming more from Health Canada than from industry. And we could look to the methodology used by the Auditor General in doing a targeted inspection, for example. The industry is not perfect, of course. There needs to be improvements, and I'm sure you can agree. But regarding voluntary recalls, Health Canada stated that the cases that they had to manage were not necessarily very problematic and that the industry did work with them. There were 350 issues, 31 public notices when things were more serious. And of those 31, there were only 3 problematic cases. Health Canada had a lot of issues implementing its own regulation and doing inspections, communicating its expectations to industry, and examining adverse effects, for example. And so, including natural health products in Vanessa's law seems to be a response to issues within Health Canada rather than non-compliance from the industry. Am I correct in this analysis? I would ask the questions to you. Yes, I do agree, Mr. Chair. Can you tell us more about the methodology? Because the report targeted 75 products, and we knew that there were issues with those products. And so when we look at a percentage, when we say that there are 900 products and industries that are problematic, and a high percentage, there's 75% of products that we knew had issues. And so it's a biased methodology, right? If we understood correctly, the methodology was not to see whether or not products made in Canada found on shelves are compliant. The report and the study were to see whether or not Health Canada was doing what was needed to ensure that products in Canada are compliant. And so there's a difference there. And I think that the goal was not clear. And so Health Canada was more problematic than the industry. Now, I imagine that the industry would like to have some authority and protect their brands. Is the industry against recalls, mandatory recalls? For example, with C368, and they remove natural health products from Vanessa's law, but we still give the minister recall power. What would you think of that? Is that something you agree with? I believe so. I speak for CHFA. Health Canada received its powers through ways that are not okay. Having natural health products being in the same category as drugs, that's not right. And things are changing because the definition of those products has changed. If we could look at the recall powers without redefining an entire industry, and we'd be the only country that defines natural health products as drugs. In other countries, they're linked with food. And I think the industry would be happy with such a change because it would avoid other changes that would make NHPs more closely linked to drugs. I have 1 minute left. So if I understood correctly, if we were to propose an amendment so that the minister would have a right for recall, and recalls are not problematic for the industry. Any industry would want for there to be order in their affairs, but not following the same parameters as pharmaceuticals. So we could redefine appropriate consequences. Yes, we would agree with that. We know that the department can say that $5,000 is not a lot for a fine. But we also need to understand that going from 5,000 to 5 million, that's a big difference. That's not pennies. What would be an acceptable fine? we would need to consult with the industry, with you and experts to see what would be an appropriate fine that would not create an additional risk to compliance. In Canada, we have businesses who are compliant that are at risk because the department tomorrow could decide that these industries are no longer compliant, and that would be a $5 million fine. So we could discuss a fine, but that wouldn't necessarily lead to this business going under. Thank you, Mr. Thériault.
Julian for a full 6 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to our guests. Thank you for your testimonies, especially when you mentioned the lack of consultation done by the government. We've heard that very clearly, and we heard that in all of your presentations. Also, the matter of products that are not subject to regulation coming from outside the country.
Health products industry is really important in terms of jobs, important in terms of health for Canadians. I'm a consumer myself, as is my family, and really important for the health of communities across the country. And so your presentations have been, I think, very effective in making the case for that. There is one thing that does trouble me, though, in this, as we've been examining this file, and that is a very small number of non-compliant companies. And Mr. Thériault just referenced the fact that over the last 5 years there were 350 voluntary recalls. 31 of them were forced to issue public warnings. But ultimately, 3 companies, in some cases with dangerous contamination, that simply were non-compliant. And that troubles me because I know the industry is safe. The vast majority of operators in the industry are very effective and understand that health and safety concerns need to be paramount. So I wanted to start with you, Ms. Gorham. If you can advise this committee, if we pass this bill, that those non-compliant companies would not be could continue to be non-compliant. What do we do with that small number of operators that, to my mind, tarnish the industry by refusing to work with Health Canada on voluntary recalls when they are required?
Mr. Chair, may I answer this one on behalf? I thank you for the question, and I would echo your statements that any non-compliance is a concern for any industry. I mean, it is the backbone of trust within our consumer base. What I think we would like to draw attention to, though, is those 3 incidences. If we take the number of products on market that Health Canada has claimed is 50,000, 3 out of that 50,000, we're talking about 0.006% of those which have resulted in issues. I don't believe that recategorizing and redefining a therapeutic product to bring natural health products in line with pharmaceuticals is the solution to that problem. As my colleague had mentioned, would industry be open to discussions about recall powers that don't require this reset of definition? To put it on the record, yes, we would. And I think there could be other tools that could be used to bring those who stay non-compliant back in compliance. But this is not the appropriate solution because of the unintended consequences of that recategorization.
For that, so what you're saying is if Health Canada had consulted with you on the recall issue for what is, I completely agree, a tiny percentage of the industry. The vast majority of industry, compliant, responsible, a small number of operators, for whatever reason, non-compliant. If there had been full consultations, are you saying that the industry would agree to recall without that reclassification, as you mentioned?
Yes, I think our membership has stated that before. I think we'd be open to that, but without the opportunity through consultation, getting notified that it was in a budget, that opportunity did not exist.
Thank you very much. I'd like to go to Mr. Maddox now on the same question what you would advise us to when it comes to that small number of companies that are just non-compliant. And to my mind, and what troubles me about it is it tarnishes the whole industry. I mean, we have an extraordinary industry, highest possible standards, and then you've got a small number of operators that, for whatever reason, don't want to comply.
Yeah, I think my question there would be, how did those small number of operators get to that point in the first place? I believe that if Health Canada were doing the appropriate number of inspections and using their other powers up to that point, then we wouldn't have companies getting to that point. So we've always been about process. We've always been about enforcement. There's no point layering another enforcement tool onto a group of powers if you're not already enforcing them. They don't really have a meaning. So for us, we're not against Vanessa's law. Obviously, it serves a very big purpose across a number of industries and potentially with the products that we represent. But I feel that there has to be process in terms of bringing that in, and then there has to be enforcement in terms of utilising that if and when it's necessary. Right now, it feels like a sledgehammer trying to kill a bug, and I feel like that's a little bit of overkill.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Harrington, the same question.
We have no objection to recall power. I just have to put that as bluntly as that. It's a reputational thing from our perspective. The way NHPs were attached to Vanessa's law, I think, caught everybody off guard. But the business of recall, in Canada, there are very few products that can't be recalled, and the growth in exports of products from Canada speaks to confidence internationally in how these products are regulated. And to exclude them from this, what is quite frankly a fairly routine, consumer protection measure, to us has reputational risks. So, yes, I think the process could have been better, but I just cannot find it within myself to object to recall powers for a product as regulated as extensively as this product.
Harrington, thank you, Mr. Julian. Next, Dr. Ellis, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm going to direct my questions to Ms. Auger and Mr. Skelton. Ms. Auger, just if you could refresh the committee's memory. In the early stages of your statement, you talked about the confidence of small and medium-sized enterprises in Canada in this government is very low. Was that your term, or do I have it correct?
The level of optimism that we referred at the beginning of our presentation referred to the general state of the economy and how they perceive the future of their own enterprise. And so the level of optimism right now for small business owner is low because they are worried about the future of their small business. And there are many reasons for that, and one is the current economic conditions that they perceive to be difficult.
Very good. Thank you for that, sir. And of course, we on this side of the House would contend that those economic conditions are directly related to the policies of the NDP Liberal government. That being said, is it not true that inside this particular space that the majority of these small and medium-sized business owners are actually women as well?
We don't necessarily know the makeup from our membership. We could probably maybe do some digging and get back to you on that if that's something you'd like. But from our perspective, our membership is about split between male and female. I think we're probably closer to 60% on the male side, but for this specific industry, we don't know the accurate makeup.
Thanks very much. And through you, Chair, Mr. Harrington, do you have a comment on that? Many of these businesses in this sector are female-led businesses.
I think over my career, there has been a massive change in gender in industry in general. I would also highlight that women are the majority purchasers of natural health products.
Thanks very much. So, of course, any of these comments of the minister, and I hate to say them out loud again, but referring to this bill as a cuckoo bananas bill, and of course, as many of you heard, the minister continuously referring to this, even from the officials, this unknown factory full of urine and feces. And I guess I'll turn to Mr. Skelton. Do you find that these comments, these inflammatory and provocative comments from the minister, how do you think that's going to affect consumer confidence in the natural health product industry in general?
Thank you for the question. Yes. I mean, I think we're here disappointed that we're here in the first place. I think, moreover, we're bewildered that this conversation has to continue. This is an industry that has a very strong reputation and a very high trust amongst Canadians. We've recently surveyed over 81% of Canadians use these products. And to revert back to your question about ownership and who's running these businesses, the vast majority of these SMEs are female founded or led and operated. And so any comment that takes the 0.006% and paints a brush across a full industry, I don't believe would be helpful to that industry, no.
Thanks very much, Mr. Skelton. And to you, Ms. Gorham, again, we asked officials to talk about this factory full of rat feces and urine, and of course they couldn't name it. I find that very disturbing, to be honest with you. We have a minister out there basically trying to ruin an entire industry for what reason, I don't know, a $13 billion industry. But continuously referring to that, and especially when then, if that really were the fact, of course, you would expect officials to have an answer as to where this factory was and how terrible it was. Do you have any insight for us as to where this this feces of rat full of factory is? It seems a bit odd to me. Now, listen, I know it's not humorous, but that being said, this is the minister's own words, which he kept referring to and over again. And for a Canadian, and I'm a very proud Canadian, to think that a minister would go on at length and numerous times to suggest that any industry in Canada was a factory full of rat poop and urine is absolutely ludicrous.
I'm going to start by saying that I think I speak on behalf of Aaron and myself and all of our members and probably all of industry and us around this table that we are pretty shocked to see that on one hand we're being said and you are being told that this is a very, very compliant, very cooperative industry, but then on the other hand, the worst case scenario in the past 20 years of this regulatory system is used to shame and stain a Canadian industry, one that we are all very proud of. We've all worked very hard to get it to where it was. So I'll start by saying that. As for the situation that we believe he was referring to, I don't know. They didn't say the name. The situation that we believe that he was referring to, I think we do know because, like I said, it was the worst case. I will say, though, that, however, that happened since 2023, since this Vanessa's law was passed, since the definition was changed. However, that situation was resolved using the powers that they had already had previously. The site license was suspended for 30 days. The company was given a chance to course correct. They submitted their course correction to Health Canada. Health Canada didn't accept it, and their license was canceled, and that worked. So I just find it a bit surprising that what is used to justify the need for this omnibus bill's powers were not even used in the situation that was used.
Thank you, Ms. Gorham. Dr. Pawlowski, please, for 5 minutes.
I'm always asked to follow up on the rat poop questions from the Conservatives here. Puts me in an awkward position, I have to say. So this law, the proposed law, would remove the protection of Vanessa's laws, their applicability to natural health products. The Deputy Minister of Regulatory Operations and Enforcement appeared before us earlier in the week. We asked her specifically, doesn't the government already have the power with stop sale to be able to prevent the sale of a product which was dangerous to people on the market? And she said no, that does not give them the power when a product is actually on the shelf to prevent it being sold. And this would be one of the changes that would occur if this law was passed. It would prevent the recall of natural health products that present a serious or imminent risk of injury to human health. I think from the Canadian Health Food Association has already responded to the question about recall, although I'm not totally clear where you were. I think it was, yes, we approve, but we don't like the way it was done. I think Mr. Maddox basically the same thing. I wanted to ask the Canadian Federation of Independent Businesses. Now, you represent, what, 5,000, 7,000 businesses? I mean, a lot of people in Canada work in businesses. You represent natural health product businesses, but you represent a lot of other people. Are you really telling us that you don't think the government should have the ability to recall a product which presents a serious or imminent risk of injury, that the government should not have the power to take that off the shelf?
Not saying that. In fact, we represent 97,000 small and medium-sized businesses from across the country, and about 2,000 of those are involved with natural health products. What our members feel is unfair is the way that these policies are being put in place. They're being tacked on piece by piece. There's no long-term vision, and they're not getting a lot of information or detail from Health Canada as to why these pieces are being implemented and how they're going to impact their business. That's where our members are upset. They're not. I don't think they would oppose a stop law, but what they are opposing is the way that these policies have been tackled on, and they want to be part of the conversation. They want to be sitting at the table, talking to Health Canada, asking them questions about how these new policies continue to impact their business. And I did mention Bill C-69, which had natural health product implications, and we're still waiting for responses from Health Canada as to how those will impact some of our members.
I can appreciate the fact that you were unhappy with the process, the kind of consultations and things, but the question remains, do you really not think the government should have the power to pull a product off the shelf when it presents a serious risk to people?
From our members' perspective, it's not that they're opposed to regulation within that industry. It's being part of the conversation. I'm here representing the voice of small businesses, and that's what they're telling us. They don't want to be included in part of the pharmaceutical process. They believe that NHP needs to be regulated separately.
But you also represent, what, 70,000 businesses, how many, like hundreds of thousands, millions of Canadians who you represent them as well. So, okay, yeah, you have to advocate for companies that produce natural health products, but I would also suggest you have to advocate for those many, many Canadians who work in other businesses. And do you really think they should have to be in a situation where they are subject to possibly consuming unsafe products because of that's counter to the interests of a small group of natural health product companies?
I think our small business owners have told us they want to put the proper safety measures in place. They want those checks and balances, but they want to make sure that those don't hinder their ability to compete with U.S. companies, the Amazons. They want to be able to sell their consumers at affordable prices, and some of these new policies, like I've mentioned in my testimony, will increase costs substantially.
Do you not also think, though, that and we heard from the Conservatives, there was talk about confidence in natural health products. Don't you think some of these laws are actually required in order to give consumers confidence in a product? And I'm a little surprised by businesses, because the vast majority of businesses are compliant, right? And so for those businesses that are compliant, I would think they're going to be kind of a little bit worried that not giving these powers allows the bad actors to kind of spoil the reputation of the rest of the good actors. And I would have thought it's in the good actors' best interest to see these powers be enacted, because it gives consumers confidence in the business. So I would have thought that it's in the business's best interest to have a well-regulated.
Dr. Pelosi, I'm sorry, but you're out of time. Mr. Thériault, 2 minutes et demi.
You have 2.5 minutes. Currently, nicotine is being considered a natural health product, even though I believe that it is a hard drug and it causes significant addiction issues and is negative and is problematic for people's health. Nicotine-based products are subject to rules regarding smoking cessation products. I believe that these products should not be removed from the list because they are dangerous. Do you agree with the amendment so that C368 would not apply to nicotine replacement products? I think we would agree if nicotine is why these NHPs need to be under drugs, but if you take nicotine out of the definition of an NHP, well then that would solve potentially the issue. One of the arguments against having NHPs under something else other than Vanessa's law is because of these nicotine products. So we could have an amendment, leave them where they need to be. And so I understand that you would agree with that. I'm not an expert in nicotine. We don't represent any such industry, but yes, I would agree. What do you think of inspections? Are they important to you? Inspections are key. Since 2004, with the legislation on NHP, they started doing inspections 4 years ago. We can't look before market and have nothing after. There needs to be a system to keep Canadians safe. And when there were inspections, did you know what the inspection would focus on? Were you given criteria? The interpretation changed every day. It depended on the inspectors and how they were interpreting the inspections. And the new document is currently being consulted on and so should not be used, but it's already being used even though it hasn't been published. Thank you. Mr. Julian for 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Maddox, on your comments about policing unregulated products entering Canada, and you stated in your introduction, if we don't invest in policing these unregulated products, we are going to see a greater use of this loophole, and you properly point out unapproved products create potential health risk for consumers, but also punish those companies who are deeply committed to the Canadian market, operating here in good faith and good practice. What would you like to see the government do when it comes to unregulated products? Because that is very germane to this overall discussion about how we are, in a sense, undermining the health products industry by the lack of consultation that went around the original adoption of the omnibus legislation.
Absolutely, great question. And certainly we're not against the personal use exemption as it stands, whereby Canadians are allowed to purchase products from outside Canada, 3 months supply. The key there is that the person selling them to the consumer can't be commercialising those products in Canada. So that if they have a Canadian-facing website, if they're doing promotions towards Canadians, then that product would be commercialised, and all of a sudden it's outside what we would consider the personal use exemption. So I think...
And we're seeing this?
We're seeing this absolutely, to the point where, you know, there are natural health product companies based in the US and elsewhere who have websites that would appear to be Canadian-based websites but are actually somewhere else, but they're purposely promoting their products to Canadians, and therefore Canadians are buying those, and they think maybe they're buying them from an organisation that sells regulated products. But the regulation of dietary supplements or natural health products in the US is very different to Canada, and so people could be importing products that have ingredients that are not allowed in Canada but may be allowed in the US, and we see that as a big health risk.
Thank you. Ms. Gorham, are you concerned about unregulated products coming from outside, and do you have an estimate of what the impacts are on the natural health product industry here in Canada, to what extent it's undercutting our existing industry?
I think the undercut is unknown and it's just going to get worse. What's happening right now in Canada for NHPs is that we are seeing the risk of being compliant in Canada is becoming a risk that companies literally have to judge, can they afford the risk or not? If they can't afford the risk, they don't have to follow Canadian regulations. They can set up a warehouse in Arizona or Plattsburgh right over the border, and they can sell the products without the need to go through our pre-market approval system or have any of these other regulations, cost recovery coming down the pipeline, and they can sell those products back into Canada. So the threat of, it's not just U.S. companies selling to Canadians that's undercutting, it's the fact that the environment here is becoming so strangled by red tape that it's Canadian brands that are going to lay off Canadians and move over the border. They're already being given grants to do so by U.S. states to sell those products unregulated back into Canada.
Thank you, Ms. Gorham.
It's a loss.
Thank you. Ms. Goodridge, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I want to thank all of our witnesses for the opportunity to share your side of it. I, like many of my colleagues, was absolutely blown away that the Minister of Health would come here and decide to describe in such horrendous detail and talking about rat feces. Well, trying to say this is an industry I totally support and it's very compliant, but like rat feces, urine, foreign bodies. And then when we tried to drill down with officials later on, how many cases we were talking about, we didn't get an answer. I asked for that information to be available to us. Unfortunately, we don't have it by today's meeting. I'm not sure if we'll even get it, unfortunately. And we hear in earlier testimony that you guys are pretty confident because of the amount of detail that you know exactly which person, and that the rules that are brought forward by this bill weren't even used in the dealing with that case. My question to you is, did the minister's testimony impact businesses that you have talked to, Ms. Auger?
Yeah, I mean, we weren't here for that testimony, and I can't speak on behalf of our members directly and how they felt about it, but we know, based on the small business we represent, they just want to be compliant as much as possible. But they also want to be able to compete in Canada and reach consumers, right? And so by tacking on all this additional cost and regulations, it's really hard. It's hard for small businesses, and they're really concerned about all of these new rules.
Thank you. So, Ms. Gorman, so you were earlier saying that U.S. states have actually realized that our regulatory system has become such an absolute failure because of this omnibus piece of legislation. The U.S. states are actually incentivizing Canadian businesses to leave Canada and come to the States. What kind of an economic impact will this have on Canada?
I think there's been some attempts to just separate out Vanessa's law and say that there's no cost to Vanessa's law. What we are saying is that there are 6 major changes rooted in this redefinition of NHPs as therapeutic products. When you look at 6 major changes, 2 legislative and the others regulatory, it makes it very, very hard for a small company to stay competitive, to compete with the big guys. We have 2 really big guys in Canada, a few medium, and the rest are small, and there's a lot of micro. And we can look at Indigenous businesses in the space as well, which are, I think, smaller than what would define a micro NHP company. It becomes very, very hard to stay afloat. It becomes very hard to even stay competitive. When you walk into a natural health food store and you go to buy, I'll use a vitamin C because it's well known, there's a reason there's not just one. There are many, many options in vitamin C. There is no patent IP protection on NHPs. So you can put a product out, you spend on innovation, you spend on research, you put a product out, someone can copy that product tomorrow and it'll be on the shelf right beside yours. So to stay competitive, prices have to stay within a range that people will afford, and you can't price yourself out of the market. What's happening in the States is that they're not facing this regulatory burden. It's a lot cheaper to operate, and even with an exchange rate, you can sell your products into Canada online on the 90-day importation at a much lower cost. So the Canadian consumer is not knowing, is going for the product that they can afford, that's available to them, it ships to their door. But in the meantime, we're losing jobs, we're losing production, we're losing retail here in Canada.
Thank you. It's incredibly troubling. You brought up the Indigenous piece, and so will this actually impact traditional Indigenous medicines?
I would like I would like to say yes, because I believe that there's a reason that those things need to be studied before any change in legislation or regulation is made. There's a reason that those studies need to be. What those impacts are, I can't tell you because it's not up to me to do the study, and we don't have those study results in our hand. But I would assume that for communities that have been foraging and making their teas, those are, under these regulations, considered natural health products. And so the rules that apply also apply to those communities and those medicine peoples as well.
No, thank you. I appreciate that. And I know we heard through testimony that 84% of women utilize natural health products. You highlighted the fact that your lipstick can't be recalled, but your lipstick is something that I think is a unique space, and there's all kinds of conversations around cosmetic products that I know have happened through decades of conversation around regulation. It really troubles me when we asked if there was a gender-based analysis. Again, I asked the minister's officials whether they would table them. We still don't have them. Hopefully we will before we have to make these decisions. But we are left to trust that there was actually a gender-based analysis done on this. Ms. Gorman, do you have any statistics by chance of how many of these small and micro businesses are women entrepreneurials?
Okay, Ms. Gorman, a brief response, please. Ms. Goodrich talked right through her time.
Actual statistics, no, but when we look at our membership, we think that we believe that in the micro and small space, especially in the startup space, women's health, we are looking at probably 45 to 50% of those being female.
Thank you. Ms. Kayabaga, please, for 5 minutes online.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to start by making a comment on the point that CHFA has raised around consultation. Health Canada has tabled records of 4 meetings in 2023 with CHFA where Vanessa's law was discussed. They've also tabled with us evidence of presenting at 2 CHFA regulatory conferences where they highlighted plans around Vanessa's law. They also, in fact, sent evidence of meetings in 2021. They sent them for 2020 and 2019, all on Vanessa's law. So the accusations by the opposition members that the minister or nonpartisan Health Canada officials lied is not just
point of order,
not factual. It's
just a second, Ms. Kayabaga. Point of order from Ms. Goodrich.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It is absolutely inappropriate, as per our standing orders, to accuse someone of lying, and so I just think that it.
The accusation was actually leveled by
That's not
Mr.
a point of
Doherty.
order, Chair.
There you go. So you may want to take your point of order up with him. Go ahead, Ms. Kayabaga.
Thank you. Hopefully I will not lose any time from that, Chair. So my questions are going to be for Mr. Jerry from Food Health and Consumer Products. We heard this week from the minister that there are some benefits to industry maintaining Vanessa's law, such as in precision regulating. Could you talk a little bit about how Vanessa's law can benefit from the NHEP industry and how passing Bill C-368 could actually harm the industry instead of serving it well?
Yeah, so I thank you for the question. So I mentioned previously that there's from the industry perspective, there's a reputational risk from any weakening of the authorities around natural health products. But from a consumer perspective, I think there are other really important considerations. One of them, let's take the example of the nicotine order that we were discussing that Monsieur Thériault brought up earlier. In the absence of the Vanessa's law authorities, as he pointed out, that would be impossible to deal with. The current challenge around a specific product that was introduced by a tobacco company without also interfering with the availability of legitimate smoking cessation therapies. And so what Vanessa's law, as it continues to be modernized, does is it gives us new tools to deal with that without disrupting consumer access. The other one that I think is something we're working on right now, I've mentioned our challenges around the labeling file. And this is a regulation that was just passed in 2022. we are in a position where industry is simply not going to be able to comply by the current compliance deadlines with that. And the ability of the minister to issue exemption orders under the most recent changes on C-69 will give us a mechanism to potentially deal with that. So, I wouldn't say that we rely on Vanessa's law for our well-being by any stretch, but there are benefits. And, we're talking about modernizing legislation that, until Vanessa's law came along, had been virtually untouched for 50 years. This is, important for regulating in the environment we're in, where change is constant.
What is Vanessa's law actual impact on industry? Do you think that it causes businesses to flee? Some of the statements that have been made is that businesses will flee Canada. Is this an accurate representation of Vanessa's law?
I can see no reason from our membership's perspective to fear or flee because of Vanessa's law. The impact on our industry, we had concerns when it was first introduced about things like how it handles confidential business information. We had a primary concern was that half of these products are affected by it, others aren't. But at the end of the day, I think the law, by protecting consumers, enhances the reputation of the industry. And we've yet to feel any, really negative impacts from its passage. I might add, just one final point, that the other products that our members sell, the OTCs, have been under Vanessa's law for a decade now. And this has not created any challenges for us.
Do you think that the government should be able to mandate a recall? And if you do, can you just lay out the importance of that?
There are two aspects. One of them, again, I mentioned before, is reputational. The other aspect, and I think it was a good point raised earlier in this discussion, is competitive situation of manufacturers. You not only face the possibility of those people, harming the reputation of the industry, but you also are having to compete with people who aren't following the same rules. And so from an industry growth perspective, there are additional protections there.
Thank you, Mr. Harrington. Thank you, Ms. Kayabaga. Mr. Doherty, please, for 5 minutes.
Actually, I will take us around.
Dr. Ellis, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. It's interesting, Ms. Gorham, you mentioned 6 major changes to regulations in the industries, which realistically is related to the change in definition around a therapeutic product and how natural health products fit in there. And that is directly addressed by Bill 368. We focused very much on Vanessa's law and those kinds of things, but all of the other changes, because of the change in definition, would follow suit, which are the 6 major changes that you have outlined. Could you please tell, for the benefit of those listening at home, what those 6 major changes are?
Yes, so as Mr. Harrington has referred to, the labeling changes were put through as law in 2022. Those are to start being enforced early next year. Those labeling are to essentially make NHPs a lot more similar to over-the-counter medication packaging, essentially drug packaging. We have a cost recovery proposal that is now in its second consultation, has closed down, so this must be one of the consultations that is being counted. That was on cost recovery. That one is set to, regardless of anything, that is set to go into Gazette 2 spring 2025. The industry will be faced with cost recovery fees as of December 1st, 2025. We have these 2 omnibus bills in C-47 and C-69, and we also have new good manufacturing practice guidance and quality guidance that is coming out. The one that was written before was written in conjunction, the department and industry. The new one seems to be very, very similar to what is out for pharmaceuticals.
Thanks very much. And so really this characterization that 368 will only change Vanessa's law is actually not true.
I think when we want to narrow it down to it's only about recall powers, It's a simplifying. What we did is we redefined natural health products as therapeutic drugs within the Act. The Act is the highest level, and everything flows from that.
So then realistically, what we understand is to be followed is labeling changes, which Mr. Harrington has already quite eloquently said are actually impossible to follow for the industry, and the significant cost recovery program, which, again, we all understand, I think, at least those of us over here understand, that has the potential of driving 20% of businesses totally out of business in Canada. Is that true?
Yes, no one is going to leave Canada simply because of recall powers. It's the sum of the total of everything that's happening.
Very good. And of course, we know very clearly, as has been elucidated here, that over 80% of Canadians use natural health products. And the result of many companies going out of business or driving their business elsewhere means, in simple terms, people will access these products in other places, online most likely. Is that true?
We did a recent Léger report that we're happy to table to the committee if you would like to see it, but we just did a recent Léger report just to get an understanding of that. And what we see is that Canadian consumers really do value Canadian-made products. I think all Canadians try to buy local as much as possible. There's a great reputation. The industry is safe and compliant. These are low-risk products. However, the driving, I'll say, decision maker is accessibility and price. The way we are going, our prices will be more expensive when competing with the online world over the border.
I think the other thing that's incredibly important, besides all the things that you have talked about, including consumer choice, et cetera, is related to how these products are treated by the government. Part of it we heard on Tuesday was related to a study commissioned I think it was by CHFA with a very reputable company, Deloitte. And of course, the minister, using his usual bombast and provocative nature, even called that study into question of a company that actually this NDP Liberal government uses for consultations themselves. Once again, mischaracterizing the industry as a whole. How does that, again, as a representative of that industry, make you feel?
Very saddened, if I'm to be very honest with you, very disappointed. I think this industry has gone above and beyond to offer Canadians safe, reliable products. I think what maybe a lot of people don't understand is that the regulations that are already in place are what guarantee safety, efficacy, and quality. That is the pre-market approval system that Canada has. So to hear that being torn apart, and to hear that this, to have this industry shamed and stained, I think we were sad because we've all spent our careers in this industry and we're very proud of it.
You should be. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gorham. Next, Ms. Sidhu, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, all the witnesses. My question is to FHCP. Mr. Harrington, are you aware of any clause of Vanessa's law that would increase costs to our businesses?
No, not for a business complying with the law. And the previous question, if it was in regard to Vanessa's law. Because most of the things we've been talking about, the labeling issue, et cetera.
Point of order.
Point of order from Mr. Doherty.
Mr. Chair, it looks like our colleague, Mr. Pawlowski, is lost once again. I'm wondering if his staff can go and try and find him.
All right, we'll send them a message. Thanks for your concern, Mr. Doherty. Back to you, Ms. Sidhu.
Okay, I will ask.
I'm sorry, to complete that answer. So things like the labeling, the very expensive labeling project, that has nothing to do with Vanessa's law.
Any section of Vanessa's law would lead to increased cost of businesses. That's what I just want to clarify. Thank you. And we know that most natural health products producers try to comply with health regulations, because you already told this very reputed company. Sadly, some businesses do not. this bill will take us back to the place where the maximum consequences for NHP producers that do not comply with the safety regulations is a $5,000 fine from the courts. Do you think it would be fair to the producers if some companies could ignore safety regulations and not only get the $5,000 slapped on the wrist? What do you think about that?
It's the ability to affect the decision makers, to enforce the will on the regulated party is a critical part of any regulatory regime. Again, a compliant company has nothing to fear from higher fines or recall powers.
So I asked the minister because ministers is duty to safety of the Canadians, right? So if there's some contamination happened, so they have to explain that to the Canadians. Not every business is doing that, as I said that some companies do that, but now the Health Canada has the ability to call that. If this bill passed, NHPs would go back to being the only health products that Health Canada could not recall. They could recall the milk contaminated with Listeria, but not the NHP contaminated with E. coli. So what is your views about that?
Well, again, there's a reputational risk there to industry, but quite honestly, in addition to considerations around Vanessa's law, the real issue there is Health Canada getting out and inspecting. Again, as I said in my presentation, the debates around Vanessa's law are, we appreciate the interest, but the real challenges we have right now are operational with Health Canada and the current regulatory regime. And that includes, as the AG identified, the need to be doing more post-market, doing more in inspections, and in order to be able to do that, to put a lighter touch on the front end, bringing products onto the market. For me, Vanessa's law is a bit of a non-issue, quite honestly, in this, but the urgency around those regulatory challenges is not. It is why companies are not introducing new products in Canada to the degree they might be, and it is why some players are staying out of the country.
Thank you. I have 1 minute. Anything else, Mr. Maddox, you want to say about Vanessa's law?
To Jerry's point, I think we're looking at a kind of a case of death by 1,000 cuts. It's not Vanessa's law. It's Vanessa's law layered on top of other things, on top of other things. I'll give you a quick example. We have a company based in the US. They're a multinational company. They're in 6 countries. They sell about 80% of the products they sell are natural health products. They have a product regulatory team of 15 people in the US. Half those people deal with Canada. So out of the 6 countries, half of their regulatory staff only deal with Canada. That's how much of a headache working. And they're actually talking to me like, we're thinking about leaving Canada. And that might not seem important to you as a multinational, but they provide revenue to a lot of independent sales consultants. So it's very important to those people in your riding, people who sell that product. So I think it's not just about Vanessa's law. It's about all the other things that are hurting the natural health industry.
But I'm not saying that.
Sorry, Ms. Sidhu, that's your time. Monsieur Thériault, 2 minutes et demi, s'il vous plaît.
2.5 minutes, Monsieur Thériault. I'll be brief on legislative changes on labeling. Yesterday, I asked the minister if he would accept using a QR code for natural health products because in a previous session at this committee, he said being in agreement with a QR code for cannabis products. Do you believe that a hybrid solution that also used QR codes would solve, in part, the issue of safe labeling? Yes, absolutely. We need digital changes for labeling. It's one of the advantages of Vanessa's law. It gives us the tools to modify the regulations
without disrupting current availability of products. So by having the ability to pull products out of that regime and fix the regulations so that we can use QR codes, so that we can use other digital tools to enhance the labeling, and then bring them back in. And that is a new authority that was just made available through Bill C-69. And that's something that's a solution that we're pursuing very hotly right now. Those kinds of modern tools, when we have change at the rate we're having in our environment, are essential. The current labeling rules were developed in the United States in 1989, pre-internet, in a country with one language. Those rules absolutely don't work in Canada. We need to be able to use things like QR codes to communicate with Canadians.
Donc, vous êtes d'accord avec...
So you agree with strengthening the safety of these labels, and so having in larger font the adverse effects to warn consumers, but if you want to know the percentage of magnesium or something in a product, well, then one could scan a QR code. Do I understand you correctly? Yes. Do you have anything to add? Unfortunately, your time is up. Mr. Julian, you have 2.5 minutes, please. Thank you, but I will give you the time to respond to the question, Ms. Gorham. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Julian. I completely agree with Jerry. QR codes would also help with the fact that the Auditor General stated, having found labels that were non-compliant, and a QR code would allow for a quick verification of what is in a product. It would help with a lot of the labeling issues that we're facing currently. Thank you. You talked about products that are not regulated rather. I asked a question on the industry and your association have an idea of the percentage of the market is taken up by NHPs and products that are not regulated. You don't have any data on that, if I understood correctly. It has an impact on a daily basis every week, I think, and I don't want to speak for Aaron, but we receive calls every week from members who want to go to the United States instead because of the conditions that we have here. I understand that. But do you have any studies or any anecdotes that you could share? Before Vanessa's law, we carried out a study on labeling changes. And just with labeling in 2022, it was 1 in 5 Canadian companies that were going to leave Canada. 1 in 5 would leave Canada. But I believe that Canada was about 70% that would have to cut jobs. I understand that, but that's not really my question. My question is regarding non-regulated products coming from outside. What type of products? Mr. Maddox stated that there's more and more of it, but we can't say.
Sorry. So the question is a good one. We are engaging to try to find out specifics around that. Anecdotally, though, I can tell you I get multiple emails from multiple members every single week with pictures of boxes in condos and mail rooms that are from U.S. businesses. We have undergone our own investigation and ordered some of those products and can procure products that are not regulated and that would not be allowed to enter Canada that are free-flowing over the border.
Thank you, Mr. Skelton. Thank you, Mr. Julian. Next, Ms. Goodridge, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate this opportunity to ask questions once again. I really think that it is frustrating to me that this government is now saying that this is like basically and I quote the minister, a cuckoo's banana bill to go back to a regime that was the regime that this government did not spend any time actually quickly fixing. They only decided to put this into an omnibus bill and hide it after being in power for 8 years. So after 8 years, they didn't do this as a standalone bill. After 8 years, they decided to put this hidden into a very large bill, hoping that Canadians wouldn't see this. And yet now they're trying to say that this is the most important piece to protect consumers, and then try and scare consumers on the entire industry by talking about an absolute one-off case. Ms. Gorham, I'll start with you and we'll move down. Do you believe that this common sense bill from my colleague Blaine Calkins is a better solution than what it currently exists in our legislation?
I think that this bill is important because it's given us the opportunity to come talk about it, which we were not granted before Bill C-47. So for that, I'll say thank you, Chair and all members. It's the first time we kind of all have our say. But I think the bill is also important because putting natural health products under the definition of therapeutic drugs is not what's good for industry. It's not what's good for Canadians. If there are gaps, those can be addressed and discussed.
Mr. Maddox?
I think if I could add...
Just let me, sorry. Mr. Maddox?
I don't think this bill is a solution, but it's certainly a good step back and let's reset. And you can see here we've got 4 associations. There's many other associations like Traditional Chinese Medicine and others. An incredibly passionate industry. You've probably all received postcards from people in this industry. We want to consult. We want to be involved. We probably the most open, like in my time working with these people, we're probably the most open industry in terms of sharing solutions and working towards best practice. So let's take that step back and then we can work out what's next.
Thank you. Ms. Auger or Mr. Gannett?
Yeah, I think from our members' perspective, this bill is so important. It's not a solution either because what existed before is not perfect either. It certainly has some issues to it, and those have been raised by our members before. But, you know, taking a step back and really assessing as the bigger picture and taking a look at cost recovery and the impacts that will have on small businesses is certainly an important step too. I will add that we do represent traditional Chinese medicine as a group of ours, and they have provided us with some significant numbers in terms of how all of these changes are going to impact their imports of products. And something as simple as a ginseng bottle may cost a consumer a significant amount of money going forward in Canada.
Thank you. Mr. Harrington?
I'll concede the question, Ms. Kremchinsky.
Thank you. I think, you know, when we're thinking about this bill, I think from FHCP's perspective, we appreciate the attention that it's bringing to talking about the challenges in the NHP program, things like labeling, things like cost recovery. These are all things my colleagues across the table have talked about today. But all of these, actually, they predate Vanessa's law. And I think Bill 368, it doesn't solve those problems. But we do really appreciate the opportunity to talk about what are these challenges facing our industry and thinking through how can we work to solve those. I think, as we said in our opening statement, you know, this bill doesn't solve those problems, but by working together, we can find those solutions and bring that forward to be safe and provide a common sense approach for Canadians.
Thank you. And I will go to Mr. Skelton.
Yeah, I think this is a point of clarity. You know, Vanessa's law is not recall powers. Vanessa's law is the recategorization of NHPs to be the same as pharmaceuticals, and that's the concern. I think if there's proper process and discussions and deliberations and analysis, we're all open to that. I think everyone across this group would be open to that. But it's the reclassification that imparts the recall powers that's the concern.
I think this is part of a larger space that we've been hearing, and I know myself and many of my colleagues, I would assume most members of Parliament, received thousands of pieces of correspondence and individual unique ones. I know I talked to many people that brought this forward as a very serious concern because they wanted to have their choice in an industry that they trust and be able to make an informed decision, and that has been robbed of them, or they feel like that is going to be. Mr. Maddox, I'm going to give you the last word because you've raised so many concerns regarding the imports and the stuff that is just coming across the border. And I'm just wondering if you can clarify if there's anything else you'd like to say on this, because I think this is something that we really need an economic impact. And I don't know if the government actually did that, because I don't think they actually understood that this was a problem.
No, and I was interested in the question about whether industry had done research on that, and maybe interested can play a part in government doing research on that rather than it being on industry. We definitely want to play a role in that. But to me, the fact that I can go online and order an unregulated product from Mexico or Japan or the US or wherever, and it may have ingredients on it, but I don't know if what it says on there is what is in it. Whereas when I order a product from Canada, I know, or a product that's regulated in Canada. So yeah, I think that's a really important step in terms of how do we have more oversight of that, and I guess how do we understand the size of that issue.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Maddox. Thank you, Ms. Goodrich. Last word goes to Mr. Nakvi for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. And again, first of all, thank you to all of you for being here, spending that much time with us, and your thoughtful remarks. Mr. Harrington, I wanna talk to you a little bit about your views on Vanessa's law. What I'm hearing from you, that it's an important piece of legislation that is good for consumers in protecting Canadians, but also for industry. Am I correct?
We see no harm in it, absolutely.
And again, just to clearly understand your view about this particular bill that we are discussing, that you feel that this bill, if passed in its current form, could be harmful to the industry and to Canadians.
Doesn't solve the problems that we're facing. Maybe put it that way. And I want to keep coming back to that.
Because I think I'm hearing from you that operations, how Health Canada is sort of the operating side of things is more of a bigger concern for you.
Yeah, making natural health products therapeutic products does not necessarily make them pharmaceuticals. In fact, the therapeutic product regime goes from pharmaceuticals and vaccines to medical devices. It is a broad category. The real issues that we're facing are regulatory. It has been identified from the time Vanessa's law became law that we need to treat consumer health products differently from prescription drugs. And if, the fact that we're spending this much time talking about labeling is one of the most obvious reasons for that, because you label a consumer product in a way that consumers can use that product without any professional supervision. So those kinds of issues that have developed over time, the cost recovery problem, the post-approval inspection issue that is very real, those are all things that emerged prior to the application of Vanessa's law, and they'll still be here if Bill C-368 passes.
So the set of issues that you're raising, this particular bill does not solve those issues. And we need to have a more thoughtful, serious conversation on other issues, as opposed to somehow give the impression that this bill deals with the issues around labeling or cost recovery, etc. Correct?
Absolutely.
So this is a very focused bill that deals with recall, and again, just to reaffirm, to hear what I'm hearing clearly, that this could hurt industry and Canadians if it's passed in law.
Put it this way, we didn't need Vanessa's law in order to have confidence in these products. But having now applied it, pulling it off is not a good look. It's not a good look for our industry. It's not a good look for our reputation as a sector. And it takes us out of the modernization process that's been going on for some time in the Food and Drugs Act with new tools that are actually going to be very useful in solving the problems we've got.
Look forward to working with you on other important issues that you've raised. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Nakvi, and thank you to all of our witnesses for being with us today, and thanks for hanging in there for the late start. We appreciate you being with us. We appreciate the service that you provide to your members and the level of preparation that you've very clearly put into your testimony here today. Is it the will of the committee to adjourn the meeting? We're adjourned. Thank you.